Hello, everyone. My name is Stacy Hollowell, and I'm a volunteer with the ACMP Speaker Committee, and I will be your facilitator for this session, Chart Your Strategy and Culture Course to Mars, presented by Christina Ehrlich and Beth Montag-Schmaltz. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you of a few things so that you can get the most out of your Global Connect experience. I know you've heard several times now, but please don't forget to use your participation guide to take down notes, thoughts, and key takeaways. Also, please take a few moments after each session to complete the brief survey. I'd like to invite you to check out our two remaining live sessions, The Tactics of Persuasion, Eliminating Resistance to New Ideas with Wayne Birkin at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 11 p.m. Universal Time, and How to Assess Impact with Just Two Questions, presented by Jeff Skipper at 9 p.m. Eastern Time and 1 a.m. Universal Time. The success of our conference would not be possible without our sponsors, so we'd like to take a moment to share a video message from one of our thought leader sponsors, HCL.
Technology is a big disruptor, but people are the real fuel of transformation. And in today's tight talent market, employee experience is the differentiator. How organizations handle change impacts project success, employee satisfaction, and reaction to future changes. We embed experience design into our approach for the best change experience possible. Start your people-fueled transformation with HCL.
Thank you, HCL, for sponsoring change. And don't forget to visit HCL and all of our generous sponsors in the virtual exhibit hall. We hope you'll join ACMP's diversity leaders for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, our ongoing journey networking discussion at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 2:30 a.m. Universal Time. And it's led by ACMP board member Jennifer Rhodes. And last, have you earned your Engaged Adventurer or Sponsor Excursionist badge? There's still plenty of time to move up the Change Game leaderboard. Keep exploring and earning points, and maybe it will be your name we announce as one of our 3 winners at the closing happy hour. At any time during the session, you'll be able to ask questions. To do so, please select the Ask a Question button. The speakers will leave some time to answer questions at the end of the session, and I'll be helping them through that process. They may also be available to answer more questions in the Global Connect 2021 community in ACMP Connect. I also want to remind you that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be available in the on-demand section within 2 hours, as well as the materials provided by the speakers. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for this session, Christina Ehrlich and Beth Montag-Schmaltz. Christina is an organizational effectiveness professional with extensive experience leading transformational change and increasing change agility for Fortune 100 companies. She's recognized among leaders for quickly establishing credibility, getting to the root cause of a challenge, and considered the go-to person for being able to create actionable strategies that achieve measurable results. Christina has a proven record as a team leader, manager, and cross-functional collaborator with executives, internal teams, stakeholders, partners, and vendors. Christina has a master's of social work from the University of Southern California and a Bachelor of Arts in Biology from George Washington University and multiple ProSci certifications. Beth is a recognized researcher, practitioner, innovator, and thought leader in the field of transformation and change management. Beth is one of the founding owners of 71 and Change, which was listed in 2020 as a best place to work by Inc. magazine and the Oregon Business Journal. While proudly located in the Pacific Northwest with consultants based in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, 71 and Change has a strong reputation for delivering virtually, and they're actively engaged with clients across the United States. Today, Beth is focused on 71's strategic advantage, which is merging empathy with data, even during these complex and trying times. Beth has led her team in developing highly engaging and empathetic solutions during COVID, including ChangeX, re-entry, and virtual engagement. Beth has a Bachelor of Arts in Communications and a minor in psychology from Baldwin Wallace College in Ohio, and an executive MBA from the University of Washington. She is ProSci certified and a founding board member of the Pacific Northwest chapter of the Association of Change Management Professionals and founder of the Pacific Northwest Change Alliance. She lends the same energy that she brings to her work with 71 and Change to the board of Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Puget Sound. So let's hear from Christina and Beth about how an over 100-year-old insurance provider built a program called Mission to Mars in an effort to transform their business over the course of the next 10 years. Ladies?
Great. Thank you so much for having us today, and welcome to Charting Your Strategy and Culture Course to Mars. It's a pleasure to be here today. Christina and I, are going to share how a new strategy really needed to shift cultural norms within an organization that's 106 years old. We're going to kind of walk through 4 key components during our time together. There we go. All right, so the first one is how we engage change advocates and champions from the get-go. The second one is to ensure we prepared all people managers. That's a story in and of itself. We're going to talk about our high leader touch launch. And then finally, how we engaged across the organization, during COVID. And speaking of, it's been a tumultuous year for most people, a little bit of change going on. And Christina and I really wanted to take a quick poll to understand, how are different people and organizations looking at change? Are you proactively managing with extreme thought and purpose, whether it's your teams, your division, your department, your organization? Are you managing to the basics? We've got comms and training. We're maybe being very reactive as we manage through it, or what? We haven't made connections. Is this changing our culture, right? So I'm just super curious to see where folks might rate themselves and how much culture is top of mind. And so I think the poll is running. We'll just give it a minute.
Still got some responses coming in if you want to give it just one more moment, and then I'll share results with you.
Fantastic, thank you.
So it looks like at this point, the clear winner is A, with 48% responding that we're managing proactively, managing with extreme thought and purpose. And that's followed 33% by B, and about 19% C, and 3% D.
Great, good. So I think, Christina, that proved our hypothesis, which is culture's pretty top of mind, I think, unlike it ever has been before. We hope you leave today with some tips and tricks on how to really, again, be in that A category and proactively manage with extreme thought and purpose. And with that, let's hear from Christina about CSAA.
Hi, welcome everyone. And just wanted to level set before we begin. So I'm sure many of you have heard of AAA roadside assurance, right? But maybe you haven't heard about CSAA, and you might not have been familiar with the fact that AAA actually sells insurance. In fact, CSAA Insurance Group offers automobile, homeowners, and other personal lines of insurance to AAA members through our AAA clubs in 23 states and the District of Columbia. In addition to that, we were founded in 1914, and we have been rated A or better by AM Best for more than 90 years and are one of the top personal line property casualty insurance groups in the United States. We're headquartered in Walnut Creek, California, and we have more than 3,500 employees across the United States in offices in Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Jersey, and Oklahoma. Next slide. So it's really important to understand as we go along this journey today, a little bit about our unique culture. We are, like Beth said, we're a 100-year-old plus company. And with that comes some different challenges that we knew going into this change we might need to think about, we might need to address, and might need to really manage in order for this change to be successful. One of the things I do have to say about this company is that our employees truly embody the culture. I've worked at a lot of different companies over the years, and when I walked into CSAA, I could just feel that something was very different. These are not just words on a piece of paper to our employees. They really do embody, embrace, walk the walk, and talk the talk in everything that we do, which I think is one of the reasons why we actually have an average tenure rate of like 10 to 15 years. In fact, we just celebrated somebody who has been with the company for over 50 years. Again, kind of a unique situation. And again, that creates kind of a unique culture. As part of our culture, though, we're also super passionate about change management. So I've been in this role for a little bit over 3 years, and we've been really focused on building those capabilities. We have 3 community of practices, one for change champions, one for people leaders, and one for our change practitioners. In addition to that, we're big supporters of ProSci. We have over 350 employees across our organization and growing who are either trained in the ProSci People Manager course or are trained certified change practitioners, which is really exciting. So you can kind of start to understand a little bit about our culture so that you can kind of see maybe how that culture is truly embedded, and if you're about to change some of those cultural elements, what that might look like for our employees. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit of history here before we talk about that change. So midway through 2019, our company was experiencing a lot of different types of changes. So there were a lot of different changes going on in the industry, but more importantly, our CEO retired, and she'd been with the company, I think actually for over 30 plus years, if I'm correct. So we got a new CEO, and his name is Tom Troy. And when Tom came on board, it felt very different. I think maybe some other people might say that, that's kind of typical of when a new CEO comes in, but he really was very different. He was very engaging, made a very big presence when he was there for the first couple of weeks that just kind of felt different. So you could already kind of feel this shift occurring just kind of organically within the company. With that being said, Tom was very thoughtful about the changes that he wanted to implement. The company was at a fork in the road, and he knew that he needed to kind of put a stake in the ground about what we wanted to be when we grew up and where we wanted to be in a couple of different years. So we introduced this new strategy and culture framework. And again, he didn't want to just introduce the change for change's sake. He really wanted to generate some excitement. So we came up with this concept about Mission to Mars and Destination 2030. And we moved away from some traditional kind of language that I think kind of typical in most companies to see the words mission, vision, and values. Well, again, we wanted to signal that there was something new happening, and that it kind of created this movement within the company so that people could get excited about it. And so we moved away from vision and mission to the concept of Destination 2030, which really allowed us to create that future state and put a stake in the ground about where we needed to head and focus on as a company. And then we changed our mission to purpose, and we talked really about who we were as a company and what was our enduring purpose. Again, to signal to employees that something exciting was happening, but honor where we were as a company and preserve those things that were really working well for our employees, our leaders across the organization. And then we switched from values to core beliefs. And this was really important because with that new strategy, we knew that we might need some new cultural elements to really make sure that we were able to achieve that Destination 2030 while preserving what was working, but really with an eye towards the future. So you can probably gather that that's a lot of change for an organization that's steeped in tradition and 100 years old. What was going to happen? Were people going to react and embrace the new change? Or potentially, could we see some resistance? The natural reaction to change is always a little bit of resistance. But again, we talk about the culture, we talk about all this so that you can kind of see some of the challenges that we might have needed to take into consideration when planning our change management activities and our engagement model. And again, how do you think that we introduce this new concept with this new CEO, this new culture framework in order to be successful and mitigate any resistance that might be popping up? So we did have a plan.
Yeah, and I will say just, Christina, as kind of a third party external consultant coming in, I must have heard the word values in every conversation, right? So I know for me, I was really struggling personally with moving from values to core beliefs. Was that the right move? Should we do that? Is that going to incite the right change or have unintended consequences, if you will? And I think our entire premise was focused on make no assumptions, right? And so I think for the executive team, it was like, this is all great, but we really need to test this now with people within the organization before we roll it out. And so Christina, why don't you share a little bit of like the very first step, no assumptions.
No assumptions, right? Exactly. So we all know as great change practitioners who've been doing this for a while that the way to kind of mitigate resistance is to bring people along on that change. So we wanted to include as many people as we possibly could early in this design process. And so we created 3 different groups within the organization to be able to do that. The first one we referred to as the strategy and culture advocate groups. That was our executive leadership who were really going to champion the change, but also embody that change and talk about those core beliefs in a different way that could resonate with their employees and their teams. Then we created another group that was called the Belief Working Team. And their goal was really to take the language that our executive leadership team had created around the core beliefs and make it personal and make it relatable for all employees. So we started off with a bunch of design sessions where our executives got together and kind of determined, okay, if we want to be here in 2030, what's the culture that's going to be needed to be put in place in order for us to achieve that? What do those behaviors look like? How do we want to phrase it, right? Again, preserving what's working in our organization, but really an eye towards the future about what we might need to take us there. So that team is really dedicated to the language and double clicking on that from an employee perspective. And then our Change Champion Network. And I mean, these guys were so involved in everything that we did, from feedback loops to focus groups to measuring whether or not we were being effective in our communication planning to actually championing the change within their groups. And then, of course, being really instrumental in our gamification of the change and making it sticky and reinforcing it. So again, all these groups were engaged and created at the beginning, and then they were sustained throughout so that we could constantly go back and measure how effective we were in our engagement strategy. So with that being said, let's talk about one of the first activities that we actually did. So we're really big on metrics. You're going to see a lot of data points throughout this presentation, again, so that we could kind of measure where we were at, where we needed to be, and how effective we were in our change plans and our engagement model. So the first thing we wanted to do is assess how big of a change was this going to be for employees. Were they going to perceive this as astronomical, or were they going to be like, yeah, no big deal? We knew that it was probably going to be much more on the side of, yeah, this feels like a lot. How are you going to change my values? Like, that's why I joined this company. And what was really interesting is that when we took the data, we did this throughout, where we looked at people leaders because we wanted to understand where they were coming from, and we compared it against the employees. So we conducted a bunch of focus groups throughout our early design sessions. And in that, it kind of came out that people leaders and employees kind of felt about the same about the change. So it wasn't going to be really huge, but it wasn't going to be a small change. And so that gave us an idea, okay, we're dealing with kind of maybe potential medium resistance, medium thought around the change in terms of its magnitude. And then we decided to develop and customize our plans kind of according to what the degree of change was going to be. Next slide. So the next series of data helped us even more. So again, looking at people leaders and looking at employees and going back to what Beth said, assume nothing. So we conducted a first series of surveys when we introduced the culture, the strategy and culture framework. And the question that we asked everyone was, how are we showing up against these currently so that we could get that baseline data as an organization? How are we showing up against these core beliefs? And interestingly enough, you start to see a pattern here. So I actually was the one who thought that the employees were going to be much more critical of where we were showing up as an organization. And you can see from the right-hand side of the data that there were some gaps, but overwhelmingly kind of medium to high. And then look at the leaders, right? So the leaders immediately identified that we had some areas for improvement. And those were, ironically enough, the same low scores that the employees also identified. Now, they weren't as high as the employees, but it did indicate, again, that there's something going on here that we needed to do a double click on and do a root cause analysis and see and determine if we could activate certain programs or projects or learnings to move the needle on these. And ironically enough, it was personal and mutual accountability, both from a leader perspective and an employee perspective, reinvesting in ourselves. So again, how much time are we spending providing training, providing learning opportunities for our employees, making sure that we're getting our employees from where we are to where we need to be. And then of course, thinking big and moving fast. And a lot of people are like, what does that even mean? Well, we're going to dig into that in just a second. But again, you can see overwhelming that both of those groups both indicated that these three core beliefs were something that we needed to look at. So again, now that we kind of understood that from a change management perspective, we then started our next series of activities.
Great. And as I said, this one has a story, Christina, ensuring all people managers were included in the launch. And so the very first thing we did was really a stakeholder impact assessment and wanted to understand this key important data point. We all know, right, as change practitioners, that employees want to hear about a big strategic change from likely the head of the company, head of their division. But when it comes to the real questions they have, they're going to go to their direct supervisor or manager. So we wanted to make sure we hit all people managers and got them ready. So with that, we used our change analytics tool and very quickly realized that we were missing about 350 people managers in how strategy was typically or normally rolled out at CSAA, which was through an annual leadership conference. And you can imagine that's sort of the top executives and 2 levels down, about 150. Well, 350 was a pretty big gap. And of course, it was really that supervisor manager level that we were missing. So the way we sort of got really rapid buy-in to, okay, we need to change this approach, which means we need to slow down, which is never a popular recommendation, was let's play this out. We can have one of 2 scenarios when we roll this out. We can roll out to the leadership conference and then communicate to supervisors and managers at the same time as employees. And when their employees come to ask them questions, the answer will be, I have no idea why we did this, right? That's one option. Or instead, when the employees come to their supervisors and managers, they're prepared to say, you know what, let me tell you why we're doing this. And let me share with you why I'm excited and how I believe this might impact our area of the business. Boom, that's all it took. Okay, we'll take the second one, please, which meant slow down for a moment. If I remember correctly, Christina, I think we inserted another 3 weeks of time to get that 350 people.
Yeah.
And I love the name, Christina. You guys called it kind of the leaders lab, right? So we took what happened in a 2-day session in the bigger leadership conference and took it down to 3 hours and did it within 3 weeks across 350 people. It was pretty amazing what the team was able to put together. And, I think with that, the cool part is the engagement roadmap, there were actually 4 touch points that changed, I think, because of this whole strategy. One was the leaders lab and inserting that. Another one you'll hear about in a bit is the roadshow approach, team meetings and employee engagement. So we dramatically changed how a new strategy or new strategic direction was implemented. And rightfully so, because this was such a larger change in strategy than they'd seen in quite some time. And so you'll see the picture on the bottom left a few different times. That's the detail as we go through the slide deck. And then one of the other things that I thought was really super helpful is we incorporated very explicit directions for all people leaders, whether this was through the leadership conference or through the leaders labs, and here's what to do when, and here's materials that can help you, right? So this was kind of highly orchestrated is what I'll say, and really kind of very purposeful in how we looked at approaching it.
Yeah, which again goes back to that was not the standard in our culture. So a lot of the times we would send out a message, we just assume that it got cascaded. We did not previously really hold our leaders hand and provide them with a very specific roadmap that was specific just to them and content that was specific to them and their group. So it was a little unique for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, and Christina, I'll never forget some of the initial meetings we had around the leadership conference, which that was a yearly thing, right? And there was a team that already, was set up that executed on it year after year. I'll never forget some of the first meetings we had where you want to do what?
Yeah.
What? You want like half the agenda? Yeah, we want half the agenda because this is not just a slight change. This is a very large change, transformation that's also got to touch your culture, right? We need to recognize that. And so I know I was so pleasantly surprised to see it. At the end of the day, this was the 2-day leadership conference, and we got a very solid chunk of that time. And what I'll say is, again, those groups we had worked with previously, we were able to bring in the first group, which was our advocate team, and they were senior leaders across the organization that were kind of handpicked, if you will, in air quotes, from the ELT. And a few of them actually volunteered to prep in advance and model how we want to communicate the change in advance. And you'll see they shared their own personal inspiring stories, like why this was important to them, why they were excited, how it might impact their teams. And so we modeled that throughout the first day, had them share. And then on day two was almost all dedicated to change, building an action plan, if you will, for each one of those people leaders. They spent some time thinking about how am I going to perceive this change? How do I think my team will? What are the right actions I should take? And then finally creating their inspiring story. And this was so creative. Christina, will you share a little bit more about this inspiring story bit?
Yeah, I definitely will. It's one of my favorite parts. And again, I still look back at it and I still can't believe we got all those leaders to do that. But just to kind of level set too on where we're coming from in terms of our core belief in regards to how we want our leaders to show up. And so we're big supporters of ProSci. And for anyone who's been through the change leadership program within ProSci, this might look a little familiar. So we strongly believe that our people leaders have a unique role in terms of how we show up to lead change. And we always like to, again, anchor on ADKAR because we feel like that gives our leaders very specific and tangible activities that they can activate in order to move their employees through change. We all know that organizations don't change, people change. And so anything that we can do to help our leaders actually be more effective in that space, that's what we were all about. That's where we were all about in rolling this out. And that was really our focus. And so you start to see this theme kind of woven throughout everything that we're doing, is this focus on very tangible, very concrete activities, tools, templates to help our leaders show up effectively as a change leader. And so we introduced a couple of different concepts. One of them is my favorite, of course, which is the personal belief story. And everyone hopefully knows a little bit about storytelling and the importance of that. Well, we took a little step farther and we really wanted to connect people's hearts with their heads. And we know that the way to do that is actually to put pen to paper, and leveraging Simon Sinek and his great, the purpose of why, starting with that why statement. We actually created a little packet for our leaders, and it was a great exercise where we gave them a bunch of why statements that had come from Tom Troy himself about why we're doing this now. And we asked our leaders to go ahead and think about creating your own story that you're going to take back to your teams that, again, gets them to understand why we're doing this, but starts to get that personal connection to what the change is going to mean for them and what do you as a leader expect of your employees along this journey. So they picked their own why statement, then they got to start to create their own narrative. And what we asked them to do specifically was, okay, how are we going to do this? So how are we going to achieve Destination 2030 within my team? And what specific core beliefs were we going to really hone in on in order for us to get there? And then we asked them to talk about the what. And again, the what was success look like for our team? And so we asked them to start to use words, and then we transitioned the words to images. And this is where it got really fun. So again, think of a bunch of very senior level executives across our organization sitting down at a tabletop, drawing their story. And I mean drawing. So we asked them, we were like, hey, go Google up an image that, comes to your mind, but really think about your personal story, the story that you want to tell your team to get them to become aware about the change, but to build that desire about why we're changing now, and what is the benefit? What's in it for me, for your team? So you can see in this example, this is my personal storyboard. You can see the lovely drawing. Again, that's not my forte, but we wanted to make it fun for leaders. We also wanted to give them a comfortable space so they could draw and, again, connect their hearts with their heads, personalize their stories so that when they went back to their teams, they had something that they could share with them that really came from their heart about the excitement that they had regarding the strategy and culture framework. That was so effective. But of course, before we unleashed them out to their teams, we wanted to make sure that we were drinking our own champagne, as my leader likes to say, and we made sure that we set the CEO up for success in terms of being an active and visible sponsor. So again, for those of you who are familiar with ProSci's #1 success driver, it is always about, again, activating your sponsor to make sure that they're active and visible throughout the life cycle of your change. So that's exactly what we did. And I will tell you, again, it goes back to our tradition and our traditional kind of culture. When Beth and I came into the room and were so excited about, let's just do a CEO roadshow. We came from companies where this is just kind of standard. Well, CSAA, they hadn't really engaged their CEO in this type of capacity before. So initially we were met with a lot of, well, we can't ask our CEO to do that. He's way too busy to go out and travel across the United States and visit all the employees. And then you're going to ask him to have multiple meetings in one location. Oh, we can't do that. We can't take our people off the floor. So at the first round of negotiation, we were met with a lot of, well, we can't do that. We haven't done that before as a company. Beth and I were really passionate about this one. So we went to Tom directly and we were like, hey, we've got this great idea. What do you think? And immediately, right, Beth, he was all over this. He was so excited. He was a new CEO. And what a better way to get to know your employees than go across and actually visit all the different locations. We got such positive feedback about this choice. Our employees felt so engaged and so passionate and so excited that they were getting to meet the CEO, that the CEO was actually going to take questions from them and engage with them in like this two-way dialogue. And it turned out to be a really big success. And unfortunately, we almost made it to all of the locations, but then COVID hit. So we kind of had to transition and pivot our plans to do a virtual, but that was okay. Because again, we'd created a bunch of technology and tools to incorporate so people felt like it was a lively and engaging activity. So again, first and foremost, starting with that CEO message. Then what we know, right, is that employees want to hear about the what's in it for me and benefits of the change directly from my manager and supervisor. So we went from the CEO engagement and the roadshow, and then we developed a bunch of tools and templates and talking points for our division leading meetings and our divisional leaders so that they could have that meeting. And then we purposely went next down to the team meetings. And again, very targeted approach, very contained and controlled. We had it very well scheduled and oriented so that we set up all of our leaders for success in terms of being able to deliver those messages. And a lot of them actually used their storyboards or their story arcs and their assessments that they had all gathered through those Leaders Lab or the Leadership Conference in order to, again, engage and create that awareness and desire within their groups.
Awesome. Great. Now let's go to the fourth element, which was how do we make it stick, ... now during COVID. It was still on our minds before COVID, but now we're in COVID and we had a plan. And I think fortunate for us, it was a virtual plan. So that worked to our advantage. What I do want to highlight, folks, is I know that we've seen some questions coming in and there's some upticking going on. I know the first one's a really great question around how many folks were on the change team and exactly how were kind of some of these different groups established. We'll get to that in the Q&A, I promise. Let us tell kind of the last piece of this story, which is just really, really exciting. We knew because this dealt with culture that we really needed to think about kind of how do we practice ability? How do we look at reinforcing to make sure this change stuck? And if you can tell, Christina and I, we like all the gurus in the change space. So we brought the Heath brothers forward and took some of the concepts from their great thinking. First one is you've got to break the change into smaller chunks. You can't eat an elephant all in one bite. And the second was, how do we really shine a spotlight where it's working well so we can amplify that, which meant to us, we need to engage and we need to recognize. And again, while going through COVID, which was an element that we did not expect at the time. So here's what we did, and this was our plan all along, was to really put in front of employees a very explicit way by which to engage through a gamification approach. It was fun, it was tangible, it was very explicit, they knew what to do. We chose a tool that CSAA had already used before in their learning and development space. It's a tool called Goose Chase. It's a little kind of mobile app, really kind of slick and easy to use, and something that was familiar to the organization. And so they could play anywhere, anytime. We also had a lot of conversations around, is that setting the right tone? All of those kind of great things. But we decided to anchor the challenges or missions really around the core beliefs. And how do we reinforce, like, well, what does it mean, right, to get better in unwavering integrity? I mean, those are kind of motherhood and apple pie type statements, right? So how do you really get tangible? Well, let's show you. So here is actually that one just built. So on the left-hand table, this is just an example of the different missions that we had within this little app. And you'll notice we oriented and anchored everyone to one of the core beliefs. And of course, you got points, right? The easier the task, the less points, the harder, the more points. And I think our points ranged from 100 up to 800. And so an example, and notice that even the core beliefs on the left-hand side are very much anchored into the ones that employees and or people leaders thought they might struggle with the most. They were that much different, like especially thinking big and moving fast. So first one, this is an easy one, right? On the easier side, take a picture of the first tip and trick listed for a stand-up meeting. Now, what you don't see here is there was a link to click here that goes to their LMS system, right? That comes up with, stand-up meetings and how that fits into an agile approach. Fantastic. Second one, a lot harder. And this was a really big thing we wanted to really change tone on, was it's okay to fail. And if you are thinking big and moving fast and moving in an agile way, you likely will have failures, but how do we reward that? How do we make sure there's learning out of that, right? And so your biggest points for this particular category or core belief was really around document something that happened already at a previous project and what you learned from it. The only other one I'll point out is the personal and mutual accountability. And I'm hoping you're seeing a theme here in Workday. Right? So notice how we're connecting all of this into current systems, things that are normal. We're reinforcing, right, opportunities. And so this one was perfect. In Workday, make sure one of your goals for 2020 is associated with one of the strategic pillars from Destination 2030. Right? And of course, we need some evidence. So take a picture, and this little app had a nice little picture bit to make sure that we saw you, we know you saw it. So that was just one way to engage. So you can read the other ones. We try to get as creative and evidence-based as possible with some reflection, insight, and learning applied. And then Christina, share how we connected this even more so into your current applause reward section.
Yeah, so again, it is about reinforcement, but that section was also about creating that knowledge and ability for making the change. So when we started this process and we engaged our change champions in helping us come up with these questions, what we all started to realize is, wow, we have a lot of great programs that already exist in our company. We have a lot of great tools and templates and things that we've developed over the year, and they just kind of maybe didn't get the attention, or they weren't aligned specifically to something. So maybe people didn't know to go out and leverage them. And so again, what we were trying to do is reinforce the change by creating that awareness around the things that we already had available across the organization. So that was really key to the success of this program. Of course, it's all about rewarding people to participate in this. And you can kind of think of it as a scavenger hunt across the organization and all the resources that we have. So we actually have internally to our company an applause point system. And you might have seen something like this maybe in your company, where you can award people particular points. They can go buy a gift card or an electronic, or I actually bought a home mixer through my points one time. So again, we wanted to start off there. There's obviously implications with monetary, so we use the point system for that. But then we took it a step further, and we really wanted to, again, see who is going to be like the superstar champion of these changes. And we offered up core belief badges for individuals who kind of went above and beyond in terms of completing almost all of the challenges for each one of the core beliefs. And again, really exciting here is that people would earn them as we went. So we introduced 2 core beliefs per quarter. Actually, every 2 months, we introduced a new goose chase. And so you had the opportunity to win or earn those 2 badges if you completed all the tasks within that goose chase contest. And so over a course of period of time, there were a lot of people who were super competitive, and they gathered all their badges. And some people just maybe gathered 1 or 2 that they were really passionate about, and they're able to actually put that in their signature line. And again, we acknowledge them on our applause wall, which not only shows other people within the organization who got the points, but it also alerts their manager. So again, this constant kind of reinforcement and recognition of people going above and beyond to really learn about the core beliefs, but again, to start to activate their role in, again, pounding the pavement around what our culture needed to be in order to get us to that destination 2030. And here's some great examples. This is my favorite part that Beth's going to show us next. So it gives you a little bit of an idea, but yeah, Beth, I know you're going to walk us through this one.
Yeah, so on the left is really kind of what the app looks like from a phone perspective. Again, really simple and fun to use. And again, most folks had seen it before, right? So there wasn't a learning curve simply by introducing that app. It had activity feeds so people could comment. Again, there was a really neat picture app. The 2 folks that are pictured, as you can imagine, are 2 of the executives at CSAA. We were very explicit, again, to Christina's point, in making sure there was visible and active sponsorship throughout this. And so we had the head of HR and the head of strategy and innovation playing the game, took a picture. And remember, this is again during COVID. And this is, gosh, the first quarter, I think we launched in April or May of 2020, Christina. So we were kind of in the thick of it, to say the least, right?
Yep.
Right. So that just gives you a little visibility. And I have to admit, like, I have to call out this little guy.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this in the spirit of engaging hearts and minds, and this is an organization where culturally this is accepted. This may not work for every organization, but drawing pictures, and that was someone's picture. When we say unwavering integrity, what would that look like to you, right? So that was their picture. So I thought that was just a really fun, creative way for them to think about that in a different way.
Yeah. So again, we're big into metrics. How successful were we? I mean, we thought we were doing an amazing job. We thought this was a great deployment engagement strategy, but of course, it's always about the data at the end of the day. Were we really moving the needle across the organization from a people leader perspective, from an employee perspective? So we did, again, plan specific measurements that we took throughout the course of this project, not just at the beginning, not just at the end, but really embedded and made sure that we were gathering change metrics throughout. So first and foremost, what we did is we took a bunch of pulse surveys. We continued our focus groups. But one of the things that was really neat about this is that we actually got to embed these questions in our employee engagement survey, which we release out on a quarterly basis as an organization. And you'll start to look at some of these questions, and hopefully if you're an ADCAR fan, you'll start to realize what we were trying to do. So again, with the amount of time and effort that we were putting into an awareness campaign and building that desire within our organization to really support and show up for the change, the 2 questions are really around, I understand why, and again, overwhelmingly 92%. So there's my awareness check. And then of course, did we do a good job in terms of building that desire to want to support this change? And I think a 94% score really indicated that we were on the right track for really digging into, and again, putting in activities, putting in a campaign to build that desire, to make sure that the change was resonating at the local level, and that we were using language that highlighted the what's in it for me's, the benefits, and how people could see themselves in the strategy and culture framework. And then just because we wanted to make sure that we were hitting all cylinders, we did ask the question about how optimistic our employees were in regards to being able to achieve these goals. And again, 83%, right, said that they were optimistic. So again, just some measurements to kind of consider when you're rolling out a change. and how to incorporate them throughout the life cycle of the project. So then we move on to kind of some of the fun feedback, right? So with that goose chase, the introduction of it, were we actually reinforcing the behavior that and identifying and recognizing and rewarding our employees? So I love the first quote. We bolded it. I was home alone during the pandemic, and it really gave me something different to do during the day to occupy my mind. So again, great feedback around giving something to people during that COVID, especially during the first couple months where I think it was really overwhelming, giving people something fun to do, but also at the same time learning about the programs that we had available that could really activate those core beliefs. And then my favorite quote, because I did not pay somebody to do this, but I know this had to have been one of our change champions, because they used like the great language that we all love to see from an ADCAR perspective, is, I think this is an excellent idea for reinforcement of the core beliefs. Well, thank you, because we actually really thought so too. So we were super excited to get that feedback. And again, overwhelmingly, it was a lot of fun for people. It gave them something else to do during that initial couple of months where I think it was pretty tough on people to make that transition to work from home for 100% of the time. It also gave people a sense of getting connected with their teams. We had several leaders who actually made this a core activity within their team meetings, which I thought was a great idea. Again, creating those connection points with our employees and coming up with unique ways to make sure that we were staying engaged. Historically, we're very much work in the office type of environment. And so for us, it was a really big transition to go work from home 100% of the time. Next slide. So again, just kind of going back so that you can start to see the foundational components. So we talked a little bit about this measurement. This is the first measurement that we took, which indicated, again, our foundation. So where were we showing up across the board as a company against all the core beliefs on day one when it was introduced? And again, I highlighted that we had some challenges, right? We identified that there were 3 core beliefs that we really needed to work on. So again, we took another pulse check in July of 2020 when we did our leadership midpoint. Really happy to report that on an average, all of the core beliefs were all up, except for one. And so what we did, true change management style, went back and did a little root cause analysis, put together some focus groups, again, to determine what was going on with that core belief. Did we need to activate some other programs or maybe create another awareness campaign around some of the activities that we had as an organization that could potentially help that? And then, so again, I'm really happy to report that when we took the pulse check again in November of 2020, all of them were up, and including the 3 that had really, if you look at the core belief number 5, and you look at how it started out at 2.1 in the beginning of January 2020, and it moved all the way up to 4.5, again, indicated to us that the activities, the reinforcement, education, the awareness was working, and that we were actually creating that movement, that trajectory forward that we were really looking forward to. So again, we're about to take our next pulse check in July of 2021. So I'm super excited. That means that we've been home with COVID for a while. So it's going to be really interesting because we're about to start to go back to work in our hybrid work model. So it's going to be fun to see where we're still at as a company, and if there's any opportunities for us to, again, to revisit some of our cultural core beliefs and determine, do we have the right ones in place to really take us to that next level and reach our destination 2030. So Beth?
Well, don't take it from Christina and I. The CEO, Tom Troy, wanted to send a message to this group. He wanted to participate, so he did a 3-minute video, and we asked him one question, and why prioritizing change management is so critical to the success of his new strategy. So let's hear from Tom, and we're going to hope that technology is our friend today.
Hello, I'm Tom Troy, CEO of CSAA Insurance Group. As a new CEO with a new vision for CSAA IG, I knew we needed a new strategy. Equally important was taking a look at our culture and determining what was working and what needed to change in order to support the new strategy. We needed to permeate the organization and win the hearts and minds of every employee. By working closely with change management partners, we were able to more effectively engage the organization and deploy this vital framework. Engaging our change partners from the very beginning was the key to our success. Most critical was allowing me to share our new strategy and culture framework directly with every employee. Addressing the why and the why now to help build awareness around the change and the desire to support the change was essential. We also engaged with all people leaders, giving them the opportunity to absorb the strategy and create their own version of why, so they could articulate this to their team. Historically, the company would roll out strategy to the top 150 people leaders. Given the breadth of this change and the fact that it affected culture, we wanted to be sure that all people leaders went through a half-day session prior to introducing it to their teams. We held 7 town halls across the country. Our result was total saturation. Everyone at CSAA knows the high-level strategy and our core beliefs. They are woven into our fabric. I attribute a lot of that success to using our change partners as change strategists, involving them early and making change principles the foundation of how we rolled out this framework.
Great. Exactly. I think with that, we can move to Q&A. And Sharon, did you want to host that? Or I can see it. I'm happy to walk us through.
We've got lots of interesting questions in the chat. Lots of questions around the makeup of the change team itself. And the first one is, how many folks did you have on the change team, and what was the makeup of consultants versus employees?
Yeah, so the change team consisted of myself, Beth, and another change consultant. So I'm the internal employee, and obviously Beth was our consultant, and she brought along another change analyst to help support that work. That was just the change management representation. But there is an extended team that obviously helped to make sure that this was successful. We're actually very lucky. We have an internal communications office as well as a leadership office. And so our leadership team really took the charge on conducting those leaders labs, taking the information from the leadership conference, and then creating something very specific that was, again, consolidated down into a shorter period of time with the same number of activities, with the same output, but just slightly differently. So we actually engaged with them also early on in this process to make sure that that was a success. But yeah, it's pretty much just a team of 2 change management folks plus another change analyst for support.
Yeah, and Christina, if I remember correctly, you also had a day job. So
yeah, just a little bit. Just a little bit. So yeah, so again, it does show what can happen with a strong and mighty team of 2. 2 plus.
So just building on that, they'd like to know, how did you choose your ambassadors, and how did you classify them into these 3 groups? And were they all advocates, or did you choose to include some that were not?
Oh my goodness, Christina, I'll take the first one, which was, in fact, let me go back to that. Can I change the slides? I'm going to go back to that slide just to reinforce the language we're using, if that works for folks. Hopefully I can get there. Backwards. Hopefully I'm not getting you dizzy. But I'm going to take the first one just because I just have to giggle. I was the one who really pushed the executive team. This first one, the strategy and culture advocates, there was 1 to 2 people, 2 to 3 actually selected from each division from their executive leadership team member. And literally my request was this: please don't give me your cheerleaders, right? Like give me the folks who are really going to critically think about this, that are going to challenge us, that are going to push back. And trust me, we had some really good examples of that through the organization. That was a tough team. I think we worked with them, Christina, for maybe like 3 months straight.
Yeah. There were definitely some dissenters on that team. Talk about your, you've got your sales and your dissenters, and yeah, there were definitely some people who were very highly critical of the changes that we were making. And so again, getting their input and then again being able to transform them in real time almost over this course of 3 months to try to get them to be the biggest champions. I think it ended up really well because they all had to stand up in front of their audience of peers and talk about their core belief. And that's when I think it really came to alive for them, is when we asked them to put together their personal story. And I mean, like, I remember in one situation, one of our leaders was actually kind of tearing up because it was such an emotional story for her to be able to tell. And I think that really resonated with our audience group. So yeah, while we had some dissenters at the beginning, I do think it's safe to say that by the end, they were all fully engaged and 100% on board and actually really excited about this opportunity. When it comes to the Change Champion group, though, we do have an existing enterprise change champion. network. So when we had put them together originally, we have them kind of existing, and we do a rotation throughout the year where the executives actually nominate people from within their organization, and we do give them specific criteria. Now, we had them already in place, but we did not put them in place specific to tackle just this. So they help us with our IT changes. They help us with any other types of large scale enterprise changes that go on. And so again, we weren't sure what we were going to get. They actually probably kept us the most honest in terms of how the employees were going to react to some of this. And again, definitely had some dissenters in the mix, and pushed back quite a bit on some of the activities, and also some of the changes that we made moving from our values to our core beliefs. So again, it gave us an idea of what we were going to be up against as we rolled this out to the entire enterprise.
Yeah, and I think just by engaging to this level and this degree, it was, you know, leaders, it was employees, it was supervisors, managers. This was all before it was rolled out, right? And there was definitely some angst, if you will, at the executive level. What do you mean we're going to get feedback from people and show it to people? And so we call it controlled choice. It's not an a la carte. It's not a green space, this or that, right? And so some of the words even, you know, sometimes generate a perception that you did not intend, back to the unintended consequences. And we were able to kind of ferret some of that out in advance. And thank goodness we made no assumptions, because we needed to hit this one on the mark and come in really strong. So they were allowed to wordsmith, and like they weren't allowed to play with the confines, right? There are 6 core beliefs. These are going to stick, but let's talk about the words, because words have meaning.
Yep.
So on the contrasting side of that, we've got a question about, did you get a lot of departures? Were there people that were afraid of this big change and that it maybe caused them to retire or leave the company?
Trying to think. That's a great question. We did not have any noticeable departures as a direct result of this. I think that for the most part, most people were intrigued. There's always that sense of, we've tried this maybe before, and is it really going to work? And I'll just kind of ride it out. I think that's kind of a typical reaction to this type of change. But I don't think it would be fair to say that we had a mass exodus or departures that were clearly aligned just to this. Obviously, you know, departures are a natural part of any company, but there was never any discussion around, you know, somebody specifically leaving because they felt like this was the wrong direction for the company.
Right. I think the big part again was like the word values. Like I interviewed a ton of folks kind of throughout the company before we started, and the word value, I mean, it was multiple times in every discussion and focus groups. And what I think for me, the biggest measure of success was, Christina, at the end of the day, we never heard like it went without a blip, but it only went without a blip because we had so much feedback early on. We picked the right words, right, that would resonate with employees and leaders alike. Had we not done that, I am sure there would have been extra noise in the system.
Yeah, and we really did try to connect. So like I said, we didn't just start from a blank piece of paper. We really were looking at what was working in our organization and where, again, we needed to double down and potentially introduce some new core values, core beliefs, core skills in order to get us to 2030. And I think it's because of the way that Tom told the story that we were actually so successful in being able to, again, bring people along on the change, but tell the story in such a way that it was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So it wasn't, and he's so transparent and honest about it. I think it's also because we just have an amazing CEO who's able to deliver that message, honestly, in a way that is not intimidating to the employees. And I think that really created that successful buy-in. And it's like, okay, I feel safe.
I think we have time for one really quick question, a one-word answer. Why Mars?
That was somebody's idea. They wanted to, I think at the time, remember, they were like trying to go for like a Star Wars theme or something like that. We just kind of X-nayed that real quick because that has its own whole entire theme. So that actually was a direct result of one of our executive leaders coming up with that kind of concept.
Yeah. And if you think back to the keynote, think moonshot, same idea, right? Like we're going big, people. Like this has to be dramatically different. It's not even on the planet Earth.
Well, Thank you again, Christina and Beth. And we want to invite everyone to continue this conversation by joining us for a 30-minute post-session group. It's immediately following this discussion, or you can continue to post in the Global Connect community, which you see the address on your screen. To join the post group session, click the Back to Sessions link in the upper left-hand corner. Locate the Chart Your Strategy and Culture course to Mars, post-session discussion, select the session and click join. And we really look forward, because there's still some really great questions in the chat, so we look forward to seeing everyone.
Okay. All right, so we'll leave here and then join that one. I'm gonna take silence as yes.
Sure.
Okay, I'll see you there.
Okay.